Uh, Excellent. So John isn't able to make it today. I'm not sure if Rena can make it or not. Um, John said that I needed to ask everybody to be able to sing the Cardstock theme tune.
Uh-huh.
That'll do. Well done. Um, Thank you, Sarah.
Rena said she was going to come, but that was a couple of days ago when I was speaking to
Okay,
her.
we'll see how it goes. So for those who've not been to one of these before, if you have any idea that this is going to be a well organized and slick online presentation, you're in for a shock. We literally
Come back,
make, yeah,
come
come
back
back.
next month.
We literally make it up as we go. The conversations go in all sorts of places, which is why I keep coming back for more. It is also the best uh, printing industry based, pun based online event on the planet. And I'm still glad that I had the conversation with Simon White where we came up with the pun, because puns is important. There's a couple of things that we sort of had loosely on agenda, as much as we have an agenda for anything. Um, there's a bit I'd just like to be able to talk a wee bit about, which is quite short, about the concept of apophenia. And then Stephen has been doing some thinking as part of a continuing series of bits of thinking around different manifestations of types of cards and types of card games, which I think will probably be the bulk of the conversation. So can I just do my thing quickly and then
Drag your thing out. Drag your thing out.
I will medium sized. Um, I have been working on a thing, if you're not aware of it, called the Business Meerkat, which is this is a prototype. The actual ones are currently with the printers in Italy. I'd forgotten about Easter and Italy. That's delayed it a bit. There we go. And basically what the Business Meerkat is like a tarot deck for business. I've tried to be able to create something that uses the mechanics of tarot, are kind of weirdly strange artifact enough for them to have a bit of strangeness about them, but also to be accessible to people who wouldn't go anywhere near a tarot deck if their life depended on it. So I've been trying to be able to work out a way to be able to set the scene for why on earth somebody would want to play with something that's a bit like tarot in a business context. And so what I would like to do is just talk you through that scene setting, which does involve slides, but they're very high level slides, and they talk about my coffee machine, because that's how I roll. Let me just bring up those said slides. So the idea of this is kind of how I've been trying it with a few people, and I've got some workshops coming up soon where I'm going to be using this as the kind of scene setting. And it's sort of tried to bring an element of sort of neuroscience into being able to understand why playing cards and tarot modules and whatever might be an interesting idea. So as I say, it starts with this, which is my coffee machine. It was a purchase that I made about 5 years ago. It's very good, and it was only £50. Bico, great brand, budget without the pretension. And during lockdown, if you can remember those dark days, I was increasingly fascinated by the top of my coffee cup. It makes reasonably good coffee. I've kind of perfected the art. I've bought a hand grinder recently. That's improved it. I'm not total coffee wanker, but I'm probably about 70% of the way there. And the thing I became fascinated about was why, when I went into a coffee shop with a professional trained barista, they would create these beautiful latte art things on the top of the froth. And yet when I produced my coffee, I got these random splodges. But that also that in these random splodges, I started, because it was lockdown, and I think I was probably like many of us losing my mind, started to see things in the top of these splodges. And so, for example, in this one here, there is a centaur. Its legs aren't very well defined, but there's his head, there's his arms. You can see the body of the horse. Or this one, which is a little baby elephant trumpeting out with an exceptionally long, what they call them, trunk out there. Or this one, which interestingly, I see the kind of ghosty SpongeBob SquarePants type character here with its eyes and its mouth, because we are deeply trained to be able to spot faces. But then I can also see a bird swooping down. There's its beak poking into something there, and there's one of its wings, and the other wing is up there. And I got so fascinated by this that obviously I set up a Twitter account to be able to publish my coffee on a regular basis to see what other people find of it. And I found some things that were very interesting. I found that sometimes you'd put one out and everybody would see the same thing. And sometimes you put one out and you get this huge variation in stuff. I also found out that often somebody would say, I see a cup of coffee. And I found that fascinating. It could be an indicator of neurodivergence for people on the autism spectrum. Often they would struggle to be able to see things other than just a cup of coffee when presented with the froth on a cup of coffee. With a lot of people, though, it's because they're assholes and they like spoiling things. They don't like to play games. Which is interesting because if you put a cup of coffee top onto an AI image analysis tool, it will say it's a cup of coffee. So these assholes are actually showing that they are replaceable by AI, which I think is probably a good thing. So what's going on is this thing called apophenia. Apophenia is our human brain ability to be able to see patterns in random things. And so that's why you can spot these things in the top of a coffee or in the clouds or on the top of a piece of fruit. And from an evolutionary perspective, the reason presumably is because it means that if we are in a position where we need to make fast judgment about whether some random patterns are random or are in fact something that's going to eat us, we can act quickly to be able to just run. Because the cost benefit analysis of actually getting into the detail of whether it is a tiger or not is not worth calculating, certainly not worth producing a spreadsheet for. Now, there's downsides to this. One of the biggest downsides to this is that apophenia is also one of the root causes of conspiracy theories. Because you follow the money man, and if you do the research, and if you follow the man, you'll find out that JFK was killed by a multitude of reasons that weren't just Lee Harvey Oswald shooting him. And apparently 60% of the American population believe that there is a conspiracy theory in the JFK shooting, which is kind of weird, but it's because you can create all the patterns that you want from random data. Now, the thing that I'm really interested in is that apophenia feels like it could be something we could hack into. If there was only a way that we could do that, if there's only a way we could create random information and then put it into patterns to enable us to be able to, say, reframe problems or be able to think about the world from different perspectives, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? And of course, that thing already exists. That thing is tarot, because at the core of tarot is random data and a way of being able to interpret it to help people to be able to tell stories in different ways, or to be able to help them interpret the world around them in different ways. And that's why it's an interesting mechanic to be able to take into the business meerkat, which is what I've been doing. Anyway, that's like the preamble. That's all I wanted to share with you, but I was just interested to be able to share it with a group of people to see whether it made any sort of coherent sense or not, basically. And I'll stop talking now for a moment. Hello, Joel.
So the apophenia thing was what caught my attention. I followed Cardstock quietly, but the apophenia thing really caught my attention. What I've been doing for a long time in workshops is, like, in stage one, when we're just collecting data and making some observations, I brief the room or the team before we start, just to start spotting yellow things. And we create a thread and they're just showing me yellow things. And it feels beside and not really to do with the project, but actually what I'm trying to do is train people to be observant, right? Then in the second phase, or in the second week, sometimes Then I introduced the idea of apophenia. And so I asked them to do exactly the same thing, but spotting faces, images, and things, in the hope that in that second phase, what we're really trying to do is see the relationship between the random data. So I'm sort of trying to train people's brains without telling them what I'm doing. And it feels like just a bit of fun.
Yeah.
And then later on, they start to talk about, maybe taking a different route into work and tell us something you saw on the way in. So you're trying to break that pattern.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So but it's almost like on top of a warm-up or an icebreaker, it's just like a running theme throughout the project, just to pick up on those things. But I found it sort of works. It's sort of, yeah.
That's really interesting. What I've been finding is that when doing the cards with groups, the random input, one of the things that's really, really powerful about it is that it forces people into having to be participants in the conversation there and then, rather than just being able to rely on stock answers to things. Another is I use, I've got a big box of random photos, and I use those in all sorts of ways to be able to get people to talk about visual metaphors, and getting people to introduce themselves at the beginning of a meeting or workshop by saying, pick 2 photos that mean something about you, forces them out of just going, I'm Matt, I'm an engagement manager for Equal Experts, I've been working for 30 years and I work in IT, which is my stock, or my stock answer is slightly less boring than that, but
Oh, you practice that, man.
Yeah. And that is really interesting about how do you find ways to force people to actually have conversations today? Because the other thing is we've got really good in the last few years at not being present for conversation, to get distracted, to be on a call like this and then be doing our email and our Slack messages and our Signal messages and our WhatsApp messages all at the same time whilst pretending to be there.
Matt, so here what I'm hearing from what you say there is that it's really interesting to de-habituate people, both in what they say and how they respond to things and how they interact with people. I think that's what we
That's
often
the core, yeah.
So I found, because I have no shame, I just steal from other places. And I've been using something, a Maori ritual greeting, which I've talked about before. The pepe ha, apparently, that's how to say it. And the Maori describe themselves as an itinerant people. I discovered this when I went on a book tour there, and did the art market tourist bit of spending time with some Maori elders, like you do, because I can afford to pay them to do that. Anyway, so describe themselves as an itinerant people, and therefore they're constantly coming across people who might have something to defend that they probably don't know. And so they need a way of introducing each other, which reduces the potential for conflict. And what they do, the pepe ha, is a ritualized form of introduction. And it starts with the landscape that you come from, or your parents come from. And describe the landscape your parents come from. It's a big mountain, or the water, or the whatever it might be. And then you describe the landscape that you grew up in, if that was different. That sets you up. You're already, I think you can feel already getting a very different way of looking at me as I'm introducing myself. The guy who comes from that place with there's a hill with lots of trees, and the water that goes from that top of that hill goes all the way down to the mighty River Thames. That's where I am. That's where I come from. And then you say whatever steps you've taken to get to today. So today is the pivotal point. How did I get to today? And then what am I here for today? And then you say who you are and what your status is. You leave those things to the very last. Now, this seems like a ritualized thing and people might feel uncomfortable with it, but you can change it about it, any which way you want and marry it if you like. The important thing is you're no longer getting people to talk about themselves in a habitualized way, as you've described, but also making them reveal more of themselves than they might otherwise do.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we don't do with introductions, because we go, yeah, I'm Mark and I do human behavior, blah, 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 I've written books. I'm the herdmeister. That's all very boring and doesn't let anyone in.
Yeah.
I think this pepe ha is one of those sort of things I've stolen from other cultures as a ritual to unlock more of the human in the interaction. I'm sure there are other things out there, but I've just picked that one up and found it. Very...
No, and the other thing, and I'm just thinking about it in the context of doing the photos thing for introductions, which is the other thing that what you're doing as well, I think does is enables people to be able to introduce themselves by talking about that thing over there, not about themselves.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I will watch people and they'll hold the photo up and point at it when they're describing the reason why they've chosen the pint of beer or the clown on a tightrope or whatever it is that they've picked for, which is interesting. And that depressurizes it as well.
It all makes total sense to me, and it's actually something that I've been thinking about quite a lot. And I wrote, I'll put a link in the chat, but I wrote something in Ludagogy about 1.5 years ago about a couple of card decks that I'd created, and linked it back to this very thing. So I didn't call it apophenia. I went for the pareidolia, which is more or less the same thing, but
it's a subset
of the other.
Yeah.
But I kind of recognized while I was doing this that that's where all the learning's coming from. If you create something which is effectively content free, that it doesn't have any kind of delivery of content to the people you're working with, then they have to bring something of themselves to it. And because we have this need to create, to see patterns in things, the patterns start to emerge. So they actually can take something which literally has no content and produce their own content out of it. And it's kind of how the tarot works as well, to a certain extent, because obviously you could be a student of the tarot and learn all the meanings that have been attributed to it. But a lot of people do it very much more intuitively. And I think that's where you're coming from with this. It's sort of like, because we have this need to find patterns in things and find meaning in things, we will attach our own meanings to stuff. Anyway, I'll share the...
That's really useful. Thank you. There's one other thing that's come up in it recently as well, which has been but people saying, yes, but this is all qualitative, subjective. It's not numbers. Numbers are the real thing that you're looking for in business. To be serious, you've got to be numbers. And I used to do an exercise. I spent a couple of years doing management training, leadership development stuff, and did this exercise about data visualization where I give two groups the same data and ask them to be able to use that data to create graphs that showed completely polar positions. I think I might recreate it using inflation or interest rate data over 40 years. God, interest rates have just shot up dramatically. It's really easy to show if you do it over the last 12 years. If you do it over 40 years, you can say interest rates are just about as low as they ever have been. Stop moaning. Because actually, for the bulk of the 40 years, it was like 7, 8, 12, 15, 18%. And the 4% or whatever we're at the moment is piddly in comparison. So that idea that actually spotting patterns in random data, that's exactly what people are doing every time they draw a graph.
So Matt, there's a pareidolia as a related, and that is more about seeing agency rather than just patterns. So you see things which are alive. You imagine something's there, and so I often play a game which it's not a randomly generated, but just some line I've drawn on a graph that I then animate and stop at various points. So yeah, tell me about what's happened here. And normally people will say, well, something's driven that up here, and then clearly, and they imagine there's going to be some sort of extension of the growth, and then it changes, goes down, and they imagine something's happening. It's just completely invented by me. What it reveals is that they see agency behind this line, and we all read it all the time. We all read stuff that's going on that's making these patterns that we trace there, and that's a really interesting thing to get out on the table, because once you realize that you're seeing these things out there that don't exist, you can actually begin to look at actually what's in front of you a lot cleaner. Also, you can use it as a creative springboard and get to see things that turn what you've described patterns and turn them into sort of huge movements, and you can color them in that way. So it can work both ways. But it's the interesting thing, the idea that there's agency, there's a sense that we have in pareidolia.
Interesting. One last thing to close this bit, and then let's go to what Stephen's been looking at. But I've got the book. Yeah. presented last year. Did anybody come across Sarah Hindman? She is a graphic designer, and she's written and does a whole load of workshops about the impact that typography has on what we think about things. And best illustrated, she does this one exercise where she gets people to be able to write, what do you call them, tasting notes about perfumes. And one of the bottles of perfume has got a very spiky font, and the other bottle of perfume has got a very cursive, flowery font. And the flavor notes that come out are quite different. You know, citrus stuff coming out on the spiky font, more floral, rosy kind of thing. And now, of course, the perfume inside is exactly the same. And she's been working with people like Heston Blumenthal to be able to look at how you can create menus with typefaces that enable the enhancing of the food that is to come, because all of this stuff. And again, it's the same thing, that the patterns are pretty much random, except they're carefully chosen, but a whole bunch of cultural things that come through. What I also learned from that is if you use Helvetica in any of your presentations, you're the most boring person in the world, which is really bad news, because I had to present after her using a deck where I'd used Helvetica. So I can read up on the people that you're presenting about after at events is my main lesson from that.
Could have been worse. You could have used Comic Sans.
Comic Sans.
instead.
Well, I mean, that's used by hipsters, ironically, isn't it? You know, it's gone into that kind of category now. I like Helvetica. It's a beautiful thing to be that functional. It's wonderful.
All right. I've been organizing my thoughts on this as you've been talking. When you brought up Apophenia a few weeks ago or last month, I was like, how is that different from, and that's what's been going through my head. And so this is, so a little context before I share my screen. So the book I wrote and published in 2020, a lot of it, like the fundamental premise is how do we get from information to understanding? And a big thing I doubled down on was when you get back to the when you get back to like how the brain works, and the brain is just a perceptual organ in the body, right? It's all just these neurons lighting and firing, and some through our experiences of our life are more wired together, right? Neurons that wire together, fire together, wire together, right? And I made the assertion that I'll read it here: associations among concepts is thinking. And so there was this moment where like figuring it out to arrive at truth isn't the point. It's figuring out to arrive at like a coherent perspective that makes sense to you or others is really what we're really after. Like understanding isn't an objective, quantifiable thing necessarily. Okay. And so with that as the background, let me share my screen and what's been going through my head. I've been, whoops, hold on. I don't think I need to share my whole desktop. It's still a little large. 1 second. Share screen, share. There we go. Yeah, so I was just mapping this out and saying, okay, if apophenia is the tendency to perceive connection between unrelated things, how do we know if it's unrelated or related? And I put pattern recognition over here, which is what I called it. And there's apophenia. You could see unrelated things and call it delusional thinking. You could say it's creative or combinatorial thinking. I love the phrase meta associative card, right? That I do those types of activities all the time where you're projecting onto something and that reveals something about you. Clear thinking, if that's a thing. And I kind of line this on the spectrum from objective to subjective, or maybe it's incoherence to coherence. But my question is like, when is it like, what's the difference between just what our brain does all the time, pattern recognition, and apophenia? And is apophenia more linked up here where things don't make sense? Or, I mean, couldn't clear thinking be apophenia depending on what you're associating together? So a whole bunch there, but that was what was in my head.
You need a fancy Latin name for pattern recognition because it's just too boring like that. I could be held back. Pattern recognition.
And I in the book I had examples like this, and the question I would pose is why are we able to like identify most of these? They're just circles with colors, yet we're able to say, oh, I see that.
Harley Davidson.
Harley Davidson.
Dunkin' Donuts, Google. IKEA.
FedEx,
Lidl, isn't it?
IKEA.
Oh, Dunkin'
Yeah.
Donut.
Lidl has
I
red on
see
it.
Oh,
FedEx.
and Subway at the top, is it?
Yeah,
Oh,
Subway. So my question is, what was that? I mean, I call it pattern recognition, but was it creative thinking? Was it clear thinking? Because I mean, what is that we did? And just
That's
for fun,
brand recognition.
That's brand recognition, yeah.
But what's the one at the bottom right? Maybe I'm not exposed to that one because you
Harley
could throw in
Davidson, isn't it?
completely
Harley
random
Davidson.
dots and see what people jump to.
yeah, and this came from a list of like 40, and I tried to pare it down to ones that were more globally recognized because some were like US brands, for example, right?
Yeah.
That I was like, that's not going to translate. And that was a point too I made. Like, if you've never encountered the prior association, then that's just going to be a jumble of circles. And I think that's a little more true when we get to like these, right? If you've seen
Yeah.
the TV shows they're referencing, you're like, oh, I see it, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or I don't want to spoil it,
Simpsons.
but if you've never seen those shows, it means nothing. It's
Bert
just
and
colored
Ernie.
bricks.
Bert and Ernie at the bottom right.
Yep, Bert and Ernie,
South
South
It's
Park.
Park.
Cartman
Park.
and
Yeah,
and
South Park.
Simpsons.
Yeah. So the point being, there's something that's happening here, and I threw in this one not for the associations of the shape and stuff, though elsewhere I do get into that. But like, it may be that you've never ever seen like a letter A in this font, but we all recognize it as a letter A because it adheres to certain qualities, right, that make it an A. But if you look at it, like, this is very different from this, but yet we recognize it as the letter A. Why is that? And so again, the point wasn't these things as much as what's going on in our brains that we're able to see a pattern and then, and is it, did we just do apophenia? We saw a pattern. Maybe that's not a pattern, like, or what? I don't know. I don't know what my question is, but it's just some reflection on all this.
So, okay. So if you take the tiger example in the grass, then that's pattern recognition because it's a tiger. If you assume that it's a tiger and there isn't a tiger there, it's apophenia. Actually, then I'd say that basically it's exactly the same phenomenon. And if you then also bring in, I was reading the book about reality. It's one of those books where you start reading and you go, I'm not sure I can carry on with this because it's just going to disturb me too much. But there's a thing in that about how if you hold your arm out in front of you and you look at your thumbnail at an arm's length, that's how much actual visual data, that thumbnail, that comes from your eyes into your brain. Everything else is interpreted. Everything else is created, extrapolated from what it sees in the middle to be able to allow you to be able to perceive the world around you. And that's why we get optical illusions. One of the reasons why, because the brain isn't actually working with pure data coming in, it's working with a whole bunch of interpretation of a very small amount. Well, it's a huge amount of data, but it's relatively small in comparison to what it is.
There's a huge blind spot right in the middle where the optic nerve is, isn't there?
Yeah. And so there's this kind of weird thing going on there, which is that they are the same. Maybe it's pattern recognition when you are right and it's apophenia when you are wrong.
Yeah, I moved that down to sort of say, yeah, maybe pattern recognition. Although pattern recognition is kind of the umbrella term, maybe apophenia is like a subset.
It's sort of,
I think it is. I don't think you necessarily have to be wrong, do you? Because no, I don't know.
Well, I definitely saw the elephant in the top of that coffee. It's definitely there. It's just not an elephant.
Except it was a leaf blower, not an elephant.
Okay.
This was the also I was thinking about juxtaposition. So that's not it. Yeah, like there's a whole series of funny things here, but like we read that and the brain forces a connection, right? Because we're a pattern recognition machine, right? That's what our brain does. It's a perceptual organ. But this is I called it juxtaposition in the book, but I would say it's apophenia as well. I mean,
yeah,
they're unrelated things, right? I'll put that back up.
That isn't that more poor layout? I mean, it's to do with our expectations, isn't it, of how newspapers are put together?
Well, no. If you read the actual thing, last week, two vandals stamped, kicked, and punched Winnie the Pooh, Rudolph, and other whimsical features. I think I mean,
Oh,
the photo is about the thing that's going
Oh,
on. It's just
okay.
they're not the they're the victims, not the perpetrators. I thought at first that was two completely different stories.
Yeah,
It's a
so
bad headline. It's bad sub-editing,
it's
isn't
just
it?
Yeah.
yeah, it's bad
Why would
writing.
someone want to attack Winnie the Pooh? I'm left thinking.
Oh, because the Disney version, I can think of so many reasons.
And Xi Jinping.
Fake booze.
Thanks.
Have you ever seen the book Cooking with Pooh? It's the real book title for it's a kids' cookery book. Obviously, because
Okay.
when Winnie the Pooh went out of sort of copyright and people could start to use it, and somebody actually created a book called Cooking with Pooh.
So terrible idea.
Lisa, I think you're on mute. It looks like you're wanting to jump in.
Sorry, there's actually a cookery book for adults by a Thai writer called Bo, Bo is the Thai word for crab, and it's her nickname. And she's actually a chef in Thailand, and she released a cookery book for a charity, which she runs, helping underprivileged people learn cooking skills to work in restaurants. And it was called Cooking with Bo, and it's POO, and it was hilarious. And it sold a lot. One Christmas, it sold
So
loads
there's
in the
two of
UK.
them.
Yeah, it's an
There's
adult. You
two
should check it
Cooking
out.
with Pooh books.
It's fun. You should check it out. But it's playing on her nickname, which is crab
Yeah.
in Thai, but it's spelled POO.
Nice. Stephen, should we have a look at your research into tokens? Your token
Yeah.
research. Oh,
Yeah. And just I'll do a bit of a recap for those who are new. So one of the projects I've been working on is identifying card patterns, ways we can use cards, not so much necessarily the content on the cards, but how multiple cards themselves interact. And so just a bit of a previously on. Let me share my screen again. All right. So previously on how cards work. So just to the types of patterns I'm looking at are things like, hey, cards that flip or use both sides, or where you match one to one or many. Or there's an index card, right, that references other cards in the series. And so it's like a recipe. Or cards that slide into sleeves. So all these patterns that we could use then in other areas. And one of the things I've maintained is a lot of these patterns come from board games where things are very inventive, but why aren't we, or why can't we, or how might we translate some of these patterns to more of our learning cards or knowledge decks? And so to help me with the project, I think John saw this presentation and he's like, well, why don't we talk about some of these patterns at Cardstock? And so to date, we've talked about the flip pattern and cards that use both sides and why, like why would you use it? We've talked about cards that are stacked or overlap in some way and when you would use that, and again, variations. A few months ago, we talked about cards that when they come together form a bigger image. And I actually had a bit of an aha moment as I was clustering examples. I was like, there's a spectrum here from card things that were a picture that was then sliced up, and you can really only assemble it back into that one picture. So here's an example here, all the way down to things where like tile placement games where they do form a coherent picture, but there are endless possibilities and how those can match up, and things in between. So that was like an aha moment just from the discussions and preparing. I don't know, this month I had so much an aha moment, but the pattern we were talking about was, I'll just zoom in as an example. It's cards where you add tokens or bits or bobs to them in some way. So it could be dice that are added on top of the card. It could be like a pointer. It could be here, you've got this sort of glass bead to track things. So that was the pattern, was for discussion, cards that have things added to them, tokens, coins. I think I have an example here that a friend shared with me. Let me see if I can find it. Area, it's up here. Coinage. It's a print and play game, one card, so you can keep it in your wallet with you. And it's like a area control game, and you use just coins. And the currency doesn't matter. It's just the size of the coins is what communicates value. So largest to smallest coins. And yeah, so I just as a bit of priming, I'll stop sharing there. And I'm glad to walk through, happy to walk through what I did, but it's not a presentation so much as like, what examples do you have or come to mind for you of card decks that use additional bits and bobs and tokens and things?
And Magic the Gathering, for spawning new creatures, adding value to existing spells, creatures, and so on that are in play on the table. Life tokens, all those sorts of things.
I think there's a game called Canvas. Have anyone played that? It's an art game where you stack pictures. They're transparent cards. And so they stack on top of each other to make a masterpiece. And that's fun. You got the whole kind of Dominion type, like deck building kind of game. Mechanic.
Any go ahead, keep going.
I put together a whole you know who knows Steph Goya and Deckaholic? Who's aware of that? Oh my God, you got to check out deckaholic.com. And Steph Goya made some really cool videos a few years ago now that basically described all the different ways that we use card decks. And she talks about randomizers and sense makers. And I basically then, standing on the shoulders of giants, kind of stole some of her idea a little bit and extended it. And I created this. Let me, can I share? Everyone's sharing? Am I sharing? Okay, cool.
Don't see anything yet.
There it is. Okay.
There we go.
So this is, I called it the deck of ways. It's actually, I put it on Deckable, but there's 21 different ways that we use card decks. So there's randomizers, which could be drawing a card, shuffling, dealing, flipping. There's sense makers, so sequencing, ranking, prioritizing, choosing. And then reflection is like thinking about, looking back on. And there's a whole sort of set of combinations of things that sit into all the different places in that Venn diagram. There's sort of 21 different cards in the deck and each card expands on all of these, kind of a definition for each of these. I really like what Steph did. It was really cool to think of it as you know, there's these random features of card decks, because I think most people don't think quite so much about how this group does, but like how powerful randomization is. And then how we spend, she talked about this idea of like you diverge and things get wider, and then you kind of begin to coalesce, and then you like conclude and present the results of your findings. And that's kind of her sense making model. So there's some really good stuff in her videos. And I've tried to capture that in this deck and then extend it to be a more of a kind of broader feature set. And that's, yeah, we turned it into a free deck on Deckable, so you can download it and see all of the cards that are there and the definitions of it. But I would love to chat about this in more depth, because it's sort of like, what am I missing? Because the problem with, you start thinking about anything to do with card decks, it just expands into all these different possibilities that, you know, you think you've got everything, and then I talk to Stephen and discover, you know, 5 more things I hadn't thought of.
Could we get Steph to join the Cardstock once? Maybe do a presentation or lead a dialogue on that?
I don't know. She's not really active on it anymore. Because she's basically kind of taken off in other career directions. So, and she's also based in Portland, so worst time zone for this, but and pretty busy with career and stuff. So I don't know. She hasn't, it was a project that was active. She was very active on it like 5 or 6 years ago. And then it sort of stalled. And I think she had all these decks that she was going to build out on Deckaholic, and she gave them someone to document it, and they lost them. I don't know how you lose 50 decks, but this person managed to do that. So
it's coming back to me. She worked for X-Plane a number of years ago, I believe.
That's it. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, I remember Deckaholic, and yeah. I didn't know she had created a deck of ways. That's pretty cool.
No, I created the deck of ways, but she created
The
I created that, but she created that. She has a couple of videos on YouTube which are well worth watching that talk about sense making and randomizing.
fantastic. Well, as far as the bits on things, any non-board game, pure game examples, like I have one. I went through all my card decks and I found one that uses.
I have to say, I can't think of. I can think of ones where you've got counters and tokens that are separate from the cards,
Yeah.
but not where they're actually played on the cards themselves. I was thinking that Monopoly, but of course, Monopoly, the things are played onto the space on the board, not onto the card.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only thing I could get in my head at all. I can't think of any examples of it.
You explain it. What is it precisely? I'm not sure I can think when fully getting what it is you're asking.
Yeah, well, I'll give the one example I found. And again, I haven't played it yet, so I may be getting the rules wrong, but I ordered it was kind of a futurist deck, a novel game for exploring possible futures called Peak.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so you may know more about it than I do.
Evan Raskob's game.
Yeah,
So-
that's on Deckable too.
Yeah.
So what surprised me were the little tokens that came with it. And if you played it or you're more familiar, maybe I should shut up now and you can explain it.
No, carry on.
So I just took
Peak
a
has
peek.
been through a lot of different incarnations, so it may very well be a different version from one that I've played.
Well,
He's
I
always
just took,
developing it.
in the spirit of puns, bad puns, I took a peek at the rules for Peak yesterday. And I think the way this is used is all the players start with this, but as certain things happen, you give a token to someone else. So it's a way to track points or recognition for certain things in the proposal you make. So I guess as a tracking votes or tracking accumulation of points or votes for an idea, that was how I understood it. Which made a ton of sense. It was just, I didn't expect to get these. And then when they came in the mail, I'm like, what are these for? And so, but that was the only example I could find of like a learning card or knowledge card deck that uses like bits on a card for some purpose.
My first card deck that I accidentally invented back when I was working for a startup involves something similar, and I wish I had the bits with me. We were trying to explain a swarming algorithm across a data, and so I had to create it was literally, I'm writing about this in the book that I'm working on right now. It's literally my 8-year-old asked me, how does your product work? And I'd been asking the developers, and they'd been saying, well, the algorithm is math, you can't show it, it's just math. And I'm like, well, how do I, as the marketing guy, show this off? And so what I did was I do have the deck, actually. So I switched to the overhead. So I basically created, it's just a scenario. You pick an actor, you pick a vulnerability, a target, yada, yada, yada. Right? You lay out a grid of all these elements, and then the algorithm worked by measuring each of those cards for nervousness. And so the way we simulated that was I had a handful of plastic ants, and we just cast them across the grid. And the way the algorithm worked was it would crawl and swarm through the data and show you the paths. It's kind of like ants discovering little bits of crumbs in your kitchen, and very soon they coalesce into lines. And that was our mechanism for simulating how it was working in the algorithm. And I had no idea. I just stumbled upon it. I was like, in my brain, it looks like this. This is what I'm imagining. And we were able to use it to teach people this PhD level algorithm in like 45 seconds. Just lay it out and show it to them. And then now imagine that's happening in the data. So I'll have to see if I have photos of, I do have a photo of it. I can pull it up. Of us inventing it and playing with it.
Really interesting. And
That would be interesting.
the thing it just made me think of, as somebody, I like my cards, but I'm rubbish at shuffling. And what it's made me think of is actually you could lay out a deck of cards, and then there's a throw counters or tab or plastic ants or whatever it is over the cards that are laid out, and then where those things land are the ones that you turn over.
Yeah.
Which adds a level of randomness, which ensures that you get past bad shuffling. but it has a level of sort of theatre and risk and a jeopardy early
You can-
stages in some sort of interaction. That's really interesting.
You
Here's
can
the
play
this
dark.
is
You could
the
do
us prototyping it out and just playing with it. If I make it bigger, oh, can't make it any bigger. Oop. But yeah, this was us just playing and prototyping, and it ended up being this people using it in a workshop
Yeah,
setting.
nice.
Can you share the link to that article?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the sadly the company no longer exists, but they use the cards. We didn't do the ants, but he still uses the card methodology at Carnegie Mellon to teach cybersecurity nerds how to talk to real people. So you'll have to read the book. I'll have to.
So Stephen, are you including, when you're talking about, so you're talking about modifiers being put onto a card during a game or whatever?
Yeah.
Are you including other cards, or are they a special category?
I tried to separate that, and
Okay.
like, could we talk about cards overlapping as a previous pattern? The transparent cards, the example shared earlier, I would consider other cards. So I was really trying to focus on bits or things, tokens, things that aren't other
Things
cards.
other than cards, right? Okay.
Mhm.
transparency has some special powers though, because you can combine things that you can't
Yeah.
with anything. So
Transparency gets its own pattern, like at a high level.
okay,
So
cool.
it's
I'm
a
glad.
powerful one.
That's what I was.
That's where
I was
Gloom lives,
voting
then.
for that.
Yeah,
Cool.
So expensive to produce.
So how many patterns do you have?
I don't know. I'm losing count, like 50 plus at this point. So yeah.
I feel it. I call a deck. Get a deck ready. Get it out there.
Yeah.
There will be a
We need
deck
2
of
more.
52. Yeah. I'll walk you through just when I put a bunch of examples and then the mural board and then started clustering them. I'll just show you what I arrived at. And I think, Joel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I had a pattern identified that the ants example would fit into. And you can tell me, no, Stephen, you're wrong, or yes, that fits in, that would fit, right? But let me share my screen. So I'll start in the middle. The biggest way, just most of the examples fell into a way to track accumulation or saturation of things, or the opposite, the reduction of things. And so a lot of like if you play the game Wingspan, throughout the game, you're getting points. You add to cards points in the form of eggs, and each card can only hold so many eggs. So this one can hold up to 3. This one can hold, so that's points, right? This one can hold up to 3 eggs. This one can hold up to 2. This one can hold up to 5, right? So
They're
you
also
accumulate
in-game currency as well, aren't they?
It's an in-game currency. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to add that. The other examples I really liked, and this is, I think, what got me thinking about this pattern initially, was the living card games from Fantasy Flight Games, Arkham Horror, Marvel Champions, Lord of the Rings. They make heavy use of putting tokens on cards, usually as a way to indicate damage or health or things of that nature, or in the case of Arkham Horror, like insanity. That's what they think these icons are. So anyway, they make heavy use of that pattern. But the common thing among all of these, Earth. Earth just goes overboard with their tokens, this game Earth. So you can add like leaf tokens, which have to do with like, I can't remember, regeneration. You can grow things. So you actually stack things and then you cap them off. You can add cubes. So they have multiple types of things for different types of point scoring. So that's why I threw in so many photos. Yeah, that's a crazy overboard example, but all of these are accumulation, right? You're not moving something along a track, which is different. You're actually just adding it. And so the count or the mass of those things or the reduction is what matters. And it could be anything: health, damage, insanity, lives, points, resources, whatever. Different from tracking position, and that kind of split along 2 things on a map. So a literal like geographic map, and like, where's the ship on the map? And I took liberties with what's a card because these are really thin. I'm like, yeah, they're cards, right? We'll call them that. So position on the map, here's a space game where you're placing things. This game is actually kind of straddling the line between a map and a track, because the map is the racetrack down and back. So it's a Mad Max sort of game. So you could say it's tracking progression along a track or a map, however you choose to interpret that. So that was a pattern. Progress, I mentioned that earlier, like particularly with clips that you add to a card and you can slide a clip up and down. With dice, I gave them, they end up being their own pattern. With dice, you're tracking very specific numbers. So instead of putting a bunch of cubes, you rotate the dice to represent something. So it's a specific count. Doomsday Machine is a solo game. If you've never played it, where you're like trying to stop the machine from like blowing up the world. It's a very stressful one-person game. You rarely win at that. I mentioned area majority. So the cubes are tracking, like they're amassing, but it's like who has majority. So it's similar in a way to like accumulation, but the accumulation shows like who's dominating the thing. So here it is, the game Pandemic's Contagion, not to be confused with Pandemic. And in this case, it's a competitive game, and you are actively trying to infect different cities. So it's kind of a reverse on the whole theme. And so these colors correspond to players, and whoever puts the most of their cubes in ends up being the one who gets the value or the points for that. So you're trying to have the most. Lotus, much more peaceful flower game, but even as you're playing, you put your color tokens on and it decides who's going to get the end points, right? When the flower is finished or completed. So those are area majority. Position point. I don't like this label. I would love suggestions for another label, but this was a card thing I made last year, and I was using the pointer, but like to triangulate things, and maybe triangulation is it, but it's not always triangulation. So if anyone has a better idea for.
There's a game I just dropped into the chat called Cat Lady. My brother bought it for my son for Christmas, and you play it with a grid of cats, like that's the draw area, and you can block a particular row or column so no one else can pick from that. See the little gray cat down there in the bottom right? So that bottom row is that little token. You might not be able to see it. Little token. That might be, I don't know what they call that, but is that similar? You're playing it across a grid. It's not on a single card, but you are blocking anyone from selecting off that row.
Ooh, I love that.
How you would put that one.
One thing I just thought about was the kind of a solitaire mechanic. I don't know if you've got that, where basically you can't get to other cards. You can see what's coming, but you can't get to them yet, because they're stacked up behind it. And I can think of, there's a game called Duel that does that really nicely. And also no, it's not really a card game, but Attica does that.
That's similar to the card game called Hand of the King, which is sort of loosely Games of Thrones type theme, which is set out in a grid, and you're basically, it's like a checkers solitaire kind of mechanic, but you get blocked from being able to move when gaps appear in the grid.
Right.
Is that what you're talking about?
No, the one I'm thinking is, right, some cards are stacked over other cards, so you basically can't act. You can see they're there. It's like the future market. If you ever played Power Grid, there's a future market. You can see what's coming, but it's not there yet. And so when cards are covered up, you can't get to them yet, but you can see they're there. You can't access them until you've cleared away other things.
Stephen, your question though about those pointers on the side of the cards.
Yep.
Is that axes? Because essentially what you're doing there is being able to say X and Y.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like that. And if it's X and Y, then something like this pattern, again, I don't want to get so hyper specific that it's not a pattern, but it's something about using the.
Yeah, there you're either blocking a row or a column. And so you have two different variations. You use two pointers to indicate intersectionality, or
or blocking mechanic.
Yeah. All right. And let me run through the few others too. There was completion. This one, I took liberties, like, is marking on a card, like with an erasable marker, is that adding a token or something? I don't know, but I went ahead and did that.
That's
I
That's
do
wrong. That's what
I
that
do
is.
love to play a game that is
You'd hate
actually
legacy
doing
games,
that.
Matt.
What
the
game?
right. There's lots of train games that you write on.
Yep.
There's a game which combines both, which is completion of tokens on a card, actually. It's called Projekt. It's a German one, so it's Project L. Project L. I just need to go down. I can show it to you. I need
Yeah,
to
that'd
go
be great.
down to my office where all my games are. In the office.
While you're doing that, I'll quickly go through the others. So set completion is where you're collecting things within a defined amount. I believe, I haven't played this game, I can't remember the name, but I believe that's what you're trying to do here was complete the set to get the card. So I felt like that was different. Basic stats, like to track stats, like, you know, your dexterity or your armor or whatever. So a little bit different from the accumulation. And relative scoring. So this is, so the one I put the ants in was, and I don't have a good picture representation of it, but there's a game called The Crew, and it's a cooperative trick-taking game. But at the beginning of each round, you flip these. It's basically all of the cards, but a smaller size version. So like it'll have your pink 7, right? And then you put these tokens on that say you have to capture the pink 7, and it has to be the second card you capture, right? Or if these arrows, you have to capture the pink 7, but it has to come before or after these other cards. So it's a way to randomize or create randomized challenges by placing these tokens on the cards you draw. And so I don't know, I kind of threw the plastic ants thrown across things as a way to create a randomized challenge or a randomized explanation. Does that sound
Yeah, that
accurate?
definitely works because the idea there was, you know, can you spot the you're basically creating a scenario through, right? So
Yep.
that creates that random. Yeah, I was gonna say saturation, but now that you have randomizer, it's definitely there.
Cool, cool. The other one I'll point at that. So these last two were very distinct. So a game like, and again, if we take in the game of Forgotten Island these tiles as cards and the lines are blurry, then when you cover it, it's like dust or the sand, and the idea is you remove those and you reveal things or conceal things. Felt like a different pattern. And this is also unique to The Crew. It's where you have this one token and you can at some point in the game make a signal to everyone else. And so you can signal that, like, if you put this at the top, it's like, I have multiple of this color and this is the highest that I have. If you put it in the middle, it's saying this is the only card I have. If you put this, it's saying I have multiple of these, but it's the lowest. So it's a way to signal partial information without giving away details. And an easier example of this is the game Battle Line, where as you win a set, you move the pawn from the center where it's contestable to this person has won it or this person has won it. So the token is a way to signal something, say some information. So no, you made it down to the game room? You have an example? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Double mute. No, I'm back.
There you go.
Yes.
You're good.
The one is, these are all German games because I'm from the Germany, you know, the country where the people have the problems with the TH. So this is called Projekt L, which translates into Project L. And the cards look pretty much like this. This is one of the cards. So this is, as you can see, it's an area inside, and you have very nice tangible tokens. And then you have like the Tangram game, you know, you have to put them in here in order to earn these and to be able to collect the cards, because then you can earn, with the cards, you can earn a token, and these are victory points. And this is one of the games. So this is the whole rule set. That's it, including values of the tokens.
Brilliant.
And there's another one which does not include tokens, but it includes semi hidden cards. It's called Kompromat. It's not actually a German word, it's an invention. And it's combining several known mechanisms, but the layout actually of the game is, as you can see, the cards here. It's a two-person game, so there are cards in the middle you have to fight for. It's two spies fighting against each other, and you can see this is a stack of cards, and some cards are revealed because of the value on top of it. This has some effect on the other cards here. So it's several axes and semi uncovering of values from different cards without any tokens, just layout. And these are two that I just could instantly grab from those that might be new additions to your collection.
Mm-hmm.
And then this gets super nerdy. That's Turing Machine. I guess this is also known elsewhere, but this is very extending the card. But these two really are using these mechanisms you talked about. So that's the submission from Germany.
That's brilliant. That project L is beautiful.
It is just tangibly and visually, it's a joy. And
Yeah.
everybody I played, because it's so low barrier when it comes to we all know these games, these Dungeon and Dragon like games where you need to read hours just to get through the rules. And in this case, this is just like Set, for example, or these card games that low learning curve or no learning curve, and this is really, come on, look at these beautiful look at these beautiful tokens here.
So if you're new to Cardstock, we often walk away with our wallets much lighter. Whether it's books or games or card decks, what have you.
I might have not noticed you mentioning them, Stephen, but did you mention games where you're putting something of a certain value onto a card in order to win the card?
Oh, where the token itself has a value.
No. So no, where you're attempting to Unearth. I played last weekend or the weekend before. Nobody played Unearth. Wonderful. It's a
not
really
played Unearth.
game. So basically, you are throwing dice, and you're placing the dice on the cards in an attempt to either win the card or get some other kind of resource from the card. So there's the sort of element of trick taking to a certain extent, in that if you get the highest dice on the card, highest die on the card, you win the card. But if you throw, I think it's a 1, a 2, or a 3, then you get a resource from the card which is sitting on the card. So you can play for either of those. It's a really, really lovely game.
Yeah, as far as patterns go, I had place a bet as one type, but I also had specific counts, which had the dice. And so maybe it's a combination of those. Like,
yeah, it's not a bet because you don't get a choice. You throw the dice, and there are, or you throw the die, and they're not all the die are the same. So you get a set, I think, of 6, and I think 3 of them are 6-sided. You've also got 4-sided, 8-sided. So you can make strategic decisions about which die you throw if you want to get a low score, or if you want to get a high score, depending on what you want from that card. And what you're doing is you're trying to win these cards and collect sets, or you're trying to build wonders. It's a very lovely game, and I can definitely recommend it. We were going to play one game of it, and we ended up playing it all night because it was so good.
I will check that out then. That sounds fantastic. Yeah, I was like, so are multiple people competing for the same card, or is it just on your turn you're trying to compete? So multiple.
Yeah, because there's the way basically it's victory points that you're looking for, and there's different ways of getting victory points, so you can have differing strategies. So get a certain number of victory points for collecting all of the cities of a certain, that the cards are cities, collecting all the actually they're ruins, for collecting all the ruins of the same color, but you also get victory points for collecting one of each color, or you would get victory points for creating wonders, which is like the other strategy. You have to collect tokens to build wonders.
Have you
But,
got anything for building and stacking and making a structure out of cards?
Oh gosh. Yeah. No, I need to identify that. So yeah, there's a game called Blueprints, I think, where like literally
Yeah.
you roll the dice and you stack and you build towers, and the cards
Yeah.
themselves specify the type of building, like how tall it needs to be or this configuration. I completely forgot about that. So thank you. I'm gonna add that right now.
I don't know where the unearth thing would fit in, but I guess it's a cross between, it's competing to win, isn't it?
The other thing I do wonder out of this is, are these games which are actually board games where the board is replaced by a card or a series of cards?
Yeah, in many cases.
In some cases it does, isn't it? I'm conscious of time. I'm also conscious that I need to go because family, who I love dearly. I'm going to skip out at that point, but if you want to stay on for a bit more, go for it. Thank you all for joining another wonderful Cardstock.
Yeah, I've got a drop as well. Do we want to do the Cardstock outro theme?
Yeah, go on then.
So, you go on.
Oh, hold on a
All
second.
together now. 1, 2, 3.
Da, 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 da.
Oh, you're all terrible. Come on.
We forgot to tell everyone to come off mute first.
See you next month.
All right. See you all.
Yeah, well.
Cheers.